Thanks for stopping by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment here on YouTube and or Rumble, or maybe even by the time this gets out, Odyssey. I think library is still a thing. I don't know. But you're here and you're watching, and you guys are blessed today to see Katelynn, who's here. Katelynn is the progeny of problematic seamstress, Little Miss Ragamuffin, who was on here several months ago, and you all loved that video. So you're going to really enjoy this, because if you think Jen was outspoken, wait till you hear from Katelynn. Make sure you're liking, commenting, and sharing this, because this voice is incredibly important for people to hear. Katelynn, you are 19, soon to be 20. And as we were saying prior to the start of the show, you're abnormal for your is it what we decide, Generation Z?
Gen Z.
Yeah, you're an abnormal Gen Zer. Your hair is not spiked and multicolored, and you don't identify by Z, Zem, and Zer.
Yeah, standards.
What are your preferred pronouns? Shut up, leave me alone.
I'm a girl. I'm a woman. Is usually my response to that question.
So I don't have to worry about offending you by saying her or she.
No, you'll be okay.
All right. So you are a little bit of a prodigy. You graduated from high school at the age of 16. You started college at 17, was it? And it wasn't just a community college. Not that there's anything wrong with local colleges or community colleges, but you went straight into the full-fledged university system. And we won't necessarily get into where, but you're full-fledged university student, and you are studying what?
English.
Lit or comp or all of it?
It's a mix. I do a lot of literature classes. My focus is on creative writing, though.
Creative writing, right? And you love to write.
Yes.
Right. And so one of the things that I was interested in talking to you about, because your mom has talked about this a few times with me, you do some freelance writing, and you've been picked up by some pretty big outlets when it comes to more conservative or libertarian social topics. So who all have you been picked up by or written for?
Yeah, so I've written for Campus Reform, for the College Fix. Those are college news websites. I've done a couple small articles for the Daily Caller, but I don't really do that very much. I also write for The Revolution, which is they're a Christian website for like teenagers and young adults. And then I have my own blogs, which is kind of how I started publishing things online. I just wanted to start speaking out about the things I was seeing around me in the culture. So I started publishing on Medium, and I started a couple websites too.
Well, you can't say that and not tell us where we can read your private, not your private stuff, but your non-picked up stuff. So what are your websites?
I have my main blog is storiesinStarlight.com. That's a lot, kind of my English major side, just doing book reviews and poetry. So okay. I don't write as much cultural stuff on there, but I have a Medium account. It's just under Katelynn Richardson.
All right. And so, and that's where you tackle more of the socio-cultural political stuff?
Yeah.
So obviously you're writing for, you said Revolution and Daily Caller. You've written a couple of small articles for them, and Campus Reform. So your politics, your social leanings tend to be a little bit more right of center, a little bit more yes. conservative. How has that impacted? I mean, you went to public school for a while until you were a sophomore, basically at the sophomore level. And then you finished out at homeschool and went on into college. You don't fit the mold like we were talking about. Have you had friends that maybe are a little bit more left of center, a little bit more progressive, that kind of look at you, don't know how to deal with you, scratch their heads and walk away? Has there been hostility? What's it been like for you?
Yeah, so I'd say probably through most of growing up and even into college, I didn't have any conservative friends or Christians. for a while. So a lot of people in my classes and age group were definitely liberal. So I didn't always feel comfortable talking about what I believe because I kind of saw the reaction that people would get just online or even in person. It's not always tolerated.
No,
So
no, the tolerant are not tolerant.
Yeah. So I kind of always knew that if I like said anything, there would be people who got upset and probably wouldn't like me. And I wasn't really okay with that for a while.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nobody, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of us don't like confrontation. We don't like conflict. And that's kind of how the other side likes it, because then we tend to not want to break any eggs or break through the ice with them. So that had to have been very difficult to kind of keep a lot of that clamped up inside, especially for the last few years for you in high school. Your high school years would have been really kind of embroiled and enmeshed in that socio-cultural upheaval that's been going on.
Yeah, I can remember like even maybe as early as when I was in 8th grade, people in my class talking about like the 2016 election and going around asking people like who supports Donald Trump, who supports who, and like at that age, I don't even know what's going on. I don't really have set opinions, and I just want to be friends with people, right? So I feel like from in our culture, I think from a younger and younger age, there's a pressure for people to get into politics and especially these leftist ideologies.
Do you, having experienced both the government education or indoctrination system and then having been, taught dogma at home, obviously, and we'll touch on that a little bit here in a little while. Having gone through that dogmatic training, which I think, dogma is fine. Everybody has a dogma. Even saying I don't have a dogma is dogma. But do you see the government schools? Do you see that they are awakening that drive to be politically and socially active in students more? Are they pushing that, where they're kind of pushing that agenda on them?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes it's subtle, like you just know you have a teacher who probably isn't going to support your views if you write on the wrong side of the issue, or a lot of it I think is just peer pressure, which is normal, but it's swayed in one direction for sure. Yeah, even in like I did high school debate in high school, and the way that students are trained to debate, a lot of times the topics lean more towards progressive issues.
So like you pick an issue and both sides are progressive. They're just arguing a little differently, instead of one being a more conservative perspective and the other one being more leftist.
Yeah, and there's also, even if it's like, I don't want to say it's totally biased, but even if there's a topic that is neutral, a lot of people, there's this thing called a critique where you get up and basically provide like a feminist perspective or a queer theory perspective or a racial perspective on an issue. And it's kind of like you're bringing in those different schools of thought and woke ideologies into a topic where it doesn't relate. So I saw that a lot, that students were being trained to think like that about the world from a young age.
So let's actually talk about that for a minute. The big thing that, and because I know you're aware of this, the big thing right now is, critical theory, critical race theory, critical sexual theory, critical gender theory, queer theory, all of these critical theories, right? And deconstructionism as it's come out of postmodernism, and how we've, especially as an English major and in liking literature and writing and whatnot, that deconstructionism has had just a detrimental effect on people. But the argument has been that things like critical theory, they're not being taught in school. And I'm going to ask this, and and then you'll probably make me look like an idiot, but I would imagine your experience has been, even though the schools aren't calling it critical race theory or critical gender theory, it's being taught.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. No. Yeah, I didn't know I definitely was hearing it in school. I was hearing those ideas, especially as I said in debate, even though that debate has really helped me, but just the ideas that are being taught. The time I really learned about the name critical theory and kind of understood what it was I think a year out after high school. I was listening to podcasts and just listening around, and I heard an apologetics podcast explaining critical race theory. And at that point, it made so much sense, everything I had heard before in school and all these different things I had been exposed to. I didn't know there was a name. I didn't know it was like a cohesive ideology. I didn't know there was literature behind it. I just had been hearing these ideas for a long time.
And it kind of made sense then once you ran into it.
Yeah.
So like, what podcast did you start listening to where you were exposed to this?
I think it was the Stand to Reason podcast.
Okay.
Greg Kokel, and I think it was an interview with Neil Shenvi, who he writes a lot about that.
Yeah, absolutely. As you walked through those things like your debate team and the different classes, I don't know if they even teach humanities and rhetoric anymore, but as you're walking through all of this and you're getting ready to go into the away from the government centers of education and go home to finish out your primary and secondary years, was there a sense of relief when you came home and your parents took over your education, or did you find it difficult, and was it a challenge for you to stay motivated through that? And how did what you learned socially and culturally in the public schools, the government schools, how did that affect things when you started doing home education?
At first, I think I was pretty upset that my parents made that choice. But just because I had like friends in public school and I was kind of wrapped up in the whole system of going there 8 hours a day, and like I didn't really know anything else. But after a month or two or a couple months, I kind of realized just how bad what I was being taught actually was, and like how negatively it had impacted me, or even just the people I was around who weren't necessarily like bad people, just were influencing me in negative ways. So I think I was able to see more clearly once I was able to study on my own, and I started reading a bunch of different things around that time. I started actually reading the Bible. I read a bunch of apologetics books, history, same things I just was not reading in school. And I think that kind of helped me solidify my views.
There's no philosophy anymore, is there, in school?
There was a little bit in debate. I did get some classical philosophy in there, but it's always mixed with everything else, and it's definitely lighter.
Yeah, and it's mixed in with progressivism.
Yeah.
And so it's, they use the philosophy to kind of train or inculcate people with their agenda. That's just my bias coming out there. So when your parents told you, hey, we're bringing you home for home education, what was their reasoning in your perspective, Katelynn?
Well, it was actually prompted by an event at our school. There was some violence. So
because you live in a pretty big urban area.
Yeah, well, I was going to like a magnet school for math and science, so it was the population was kind of mixed.
Gifted students.
Yeah.
From all over the area, the urban area.
Yeah.
So you're getting a broad cross section culturally. I mean, not that anybody believes that happens anymore, but you were actually experiencing a broad section of culture in a school for gifted students.
Yeah.
And yet you still had a pretty bad outbreak of violence.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable talking about that? What was it related to? Was it a...
I wasn't involved in it. There was just, I think there was like a stabbing in the hallway while I was in a class, and the school was locked down.
in a magnet school?
Yeah.
Of all places. And so your parents were like, okay, that's enough. Our daughter is not going to get killed
Yeah.
in her gifted program. Probably a smart move on their part. But that still frustrated you. But as you said, you became thankful for it as it went down the road. How much... now we're going to touch on the spiritual. How much does your family's faith, do you think, play into that decision, and how much did that impact the last couple of years of your education through high school? How much did the spiritual aspects impact what you were learning and how you learned?
I think it played a bigger role once I was out of high school. Like I said, I started actually reading the Bible and going back to like my youth group, and which I hadn't been going to. I think that I don't really think I was a Christian before then. I think that's when I came to know Christ. I started reading through the Gospel of Matthew and just really understanding what it meant. And I read when he says, anyone who wishes to follow after me must take up his cross and follow me. Anyone who wishes to save his life will lose it, but anyone who loses his life for my sake will find it. And I started to realize that I didn't really want like the friends I had before to know what I believed or that I was Christian. But I realized that's what following Christ meant, and that it's continually dying to self. So I think that gave me more courage and prompted me to explore more and read more widely.
Yeah, well, speaking of reading more widely, what all do you have on your bookshelf there behind you? Are we okay talking about it, or is there going to be something embarrassing like Twilight?
Oh no, I've never read Twilight. I can say that.
I could say most of the people who might be tuning into this would probably go, "What's Twilight?" So
no, I have in the top shelf. I have a lot of classic books. I have some Dickens, Jane Austen, who's one of my favorite authors. I have C.S. Lewis, the Narnia series, 1984. I don't know what else is up there. Brave New World, some Shakespeare.
And you've read all of Brave New World.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway from Huxley's work in Brave New World?
I felt if you're comparing it to like some of the other dystopian novels like 1984, I felt it was more accurate to what's going on. Just the seeking pleasure and to be like numbing your awareness. There was that one line that sticks out to me when he's like, I want sin, I want the brokenness, I want to know what that is. I don't want to just be ignoring it all. I think that really resonated.
It was definitely a progressive pushing of hedonism.
Yeah.
And it's astounding when I read it, which was, long before your parents knew each other. When I read it, it was pretty, it almost made you, especially where I was coming from, because I wasn't a genuine believer at the time, it almost made you long for that life. Like there was a disconnect from sexuality, a disconnect from the effects of sex, They encouraged sexual activity. They encouraged debauchery and drunkenness and drug use. They encouraged it, and there were no consequences until you dealt with the reservation and the people who are disconnected from that advanced society. And even that, they made it look like those were the people who were suffering. And I agree with you. It's actually far more accurate in its description of what's happening today than 1984 or even Animal. I mean, now there are some similarities from 1984 and Animal Farm with the collectivist mentality. But when you look at Orwell and you look at Huxley, Orwell was definitely approaching it from the Soviet style mindset of all pleasure is stripped away and everything is about work. And Huxley is looking at it in the collectivist communitarian mindset of, no, everything's about your pleasure and about your joy. We'll take care of you. We'll give you everything you want, do whatever you want. And that is America. And I mean, I don't know. What do you see the United States, the Republic, moving that way now, where you don't have to be responsible for your actions or anything that you do, and somebody else's responsibility to pick up the pieces of whatever you break?
Yeah. Even going back to Brave New World, I saw like the breakdown of the family in that book, how it was willingly surrendered. Like in 1984, you have that too, but it's imposed, right? In Brave New World, it was people willingly, that's what they were doing because of the pleasure.
Right.
Yeah. So I see that a lot now too, just in how our society like treats children, or the selfish desire to put like a career above a family, even in like the rhetoric around abortion, like all these things, I see that like those family values are not popular.
Well, let's go with that a little bit, Katelynn, because I mean you're 19. The vast majority of girls your age have been taught nothing but it's your body, your choice. You do what you want. Get on the pill. Abortion should be your. I mean, and they're teaching them that long before they're 18, 19 years old. They're inculcated with that. I would imagine that was not your view even before you came to Christ after you left the public school, and you kept that stuff to yourself.
Yeah.
Was that just because you wanted to fit in, or were you afraid, not just of not fitting in, but were you afraid of what would happen to you if people found out?
I think both. I just didn't want to talk about it. And I also knew because there's kind of this double standard where I feel like everyone, if you have the leftist ideas, you can be open about it, but if you don't believe that, you can't. So they're so loud about it that I feel like saying anything is automatically going to get shut down. There were a couple times I remember like trying to say things, but it was always terrifying and I just didn't want to.
How old were you when your mom went through her the progressive attempt to cancel her?
I think that was during my first year of college, so I was 17.
Did that impact you much? Did you know what was going on? Did you see it happening? Or
I knew it was going on because I just see things around me and on the internet, but I didn't realize like that it could happen over something so dumb and like something so a t-shirt, right? I didn't realize people would get so worked up over that, and just how pervasive it was. I guess it kind of seemed a little bit farther away, but that
like it's happening to someone you know.
Yeah, it's happening to someone I know. It's in a crafting community. Like, why?
Right. Like if it can get into the crafting community, you know, the great knitting wars and the great sewing pattern wars and all of that, like who can it not touch? Was that intimidating?
I don't know. I think I was just proud of how she dealt with it.
Oh yeah, she did not crumble, did she?
Yeah.
At any point, did you ever look at her and go, "Mom, just give up, just stop"?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, you know her too well. Stubborn cuss that she is. So now you're in college. You're clearly like not afraid to share your views. You're writing essays, you're writing articles, and you're not writing for little out of the way some weird extremist Christian fundamentalist paper that's put out by the Westboro Baptist. You're writing for some pretty big, hard hitting institutions that have a lot of clout in that conservative, traditional libertarian style world. And are people around you taking note of that? Like people who you used to know, people you know now, are they aware of that? And has anybody said anything to you? Is your personal philosophical perspective, is it impacting your schooling? Are you running into any roadblocks? I'm going to just keep asking until you tell me to shut up and answer one.
Yeah, I'll answer. So I have probably, I'm not really in touch with many people from I knew in high school anymore. Some of them have directly told me to stop talking to them. Others I just unfollow me or whatever, don't reach out anymore, and I'm assuming
it wasn't like you were cutting them off.
Yeah, I don't know, so I don't want to assume, but I think I know why they're not talking to me. Yeah, so that has happened, but the reason I started, like, I think the earliest things I started publishing maybe on just social justice issues on Medium, I started writing about that over the summer of 2020 because I saw so many people my age, especially, just falling for what the media was telling them, all the rhetoric, and feeling like they had to go along with this in order to be moral or to look good in front of their friends. Like there was this whole posting the black square thing. Everyone did that on Instagram to show that they were in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. But I saw that, and then I saw even more happening within like a campus ministry group I was in, and people who were professing Christians falling into this. And I saw where it was leading, how it was leading deeper into progressive ideology, where eventually people were not only affirming all of the racial social justice aspect of it, but also into the LGBTQ movement and transgenderism, and just falling in further and further from the faith. So I really felt like I needed to say something and explain why this is not biblical, because everyone was kind of afraid to say that. Even people who did agree just were being quiet about it because of how bad a reaction there was. I know one girl actually who didn't post during that whole summer the black square on Instagram, and she sent a message in our group chat talking about how she was just being like harassed by her high school friends, and just was really upset about that. And those kind of things made me realize just this is not right and someone needs to say something.
Isn't that ironic that the same people who would be out there talking about not bullying and not abusing people for their views and their positions and their ideology are literally bullying and abusing someone because not for anything that they've said, but what they haven't done.
Yeah.
And assuming a nefarious motivation on their part, like, oh, you're not putting the blackout square on for Black Lives Matter on Tuesday, so you must be a racist, or you must, think it's okay for cops to kill black people or kill gays, or whatever the topic might be. Have you become more outspoken now, especially? I mean, I'm assuming you're back to in-person classes to some degree for the university.
Kind of. We just got another message last week that more shifted online, but I do have a mix.
A mix, okay.
Yeah.
So when you're doing your Zoom classes or whatever they're doing, or you're doing your in-person and there's discussion times, or when there's critiques of your writing or whatnot, is your your philosophy, is your cultural value system starting to play out in your writing and whatnot? And are people picking up on that? Are you receiving pushback now from professors and teaching assistants and whatnot?
I'm actually have been a little bit surprised I haven't got more pushback, I guess, from that. But yeah,
You have gotten some though, because you said more.
Yeah, some. It's not like directly they're saying anything to me. It's just I noticed that people stop talking to me. So it's hard to say like that it's a result of that. But yeah, I have been since I started college, like on my first day, we were at this meeting for like new students with our mentor for the college. So the first thing we did is they went around and asked our pronouns. And that was kind of like a culture shock for me, just realizing like this is what college is going to be like. So I kind of decided that like, I need to make sure that I'm not compromising in these classes and that I'm standing up for my values. So the first semester, I'm talking about this because this is back when we were fully in person. I had a class, and one of the classes, our teacher put up this video basically saying like the Bible is a myth, Jesus never existed, all these things. And I was kind of taken aback by that. But this is actually a good story. I did end up talking about it in class, like after the movie was over, and sharing with my professor why I thought that wasn't true. And she was actually really receptive to that and was talking about it with me. So it has gone both ways. There are times where I think people are more open than you think if you say it respectfully and don't come in like insulting them. If you try to build some common ground. Yeah.
Well, it's being able to engage on an intellectual level.
Yeah.
Which, like, we just need to be honest that the vast majority of people who pass for Christian in the United States can't. They're just they're incapable of engage. For some reason, we have it in our minds that Christians are supposed to be stupid and unable to engage with an intellectual philosophical world. And so when you're able to do that, to take a step back, engage with reasoning, and engage with logic. I mean, you referenced standard reason from Kokel, and there's a reason why Greg interacts with people the way that he does. And it's one, it disarms them more than anything, because they're just used to, their quintessential cliched idea of what a Christian is a fumbling, bumbling bumpkin from hayseed redneckville who just, I believe in Jesus, and they can't give you an argumentation for why. That's why when you said you started to study apologetics, like there are people who are Christian who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who don't even know what that means. You ask them what apologetics is they think it's walking around telling everyone you're sorry all the time. So you study apologetics. Who's your favorite apologist, and what's your preferred apologetic methodology?
Presuppositional. I like Francis Schaeffer, but I also enjoy.
Good kid.
Yeah, I like John Lennox too. I watch a lot of his videos, but my favorite authors are probably C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer.
Well, that's interesting. That you would. Do you like Lewis because he was a philosopher who became a Christian? Do you like Lewis because you know him as a Christian? Because there were some things about Lewis. I mean, he's a phenomenal writer and he has some really wonderful things to say. But there are also some things that he was like, whoa, hold on there, Clyde. You went way off the deep end. Have you studied a lot of his stuff, or are you more on the Schaeffer end of things?
I read a decent amount of Lewis. I mostly like his fiction. Like I loved Screwtape Letters. I thought that was the first time I read that. I was just I was blown away by how insightful he was to human nature and just the little details of things that he was able to pick up, how observant he was. I liked his Space Trilogy series and the Narnia books. And beyond that, I've read, I think, Mere Christianity, The Abolition of Man, and The Problem of Pain. I think that's all I've read of him. So.
Yeah, you make it sound like that. That's it. That's all. I mean, the Space Trilogy is, like that's like for most people, that's like 5 years worth of reading.
Yeah, it was a lot. I feel like I need to reread it because he just brings up so much in those books, especially in the last one, that hideous strength.
What have you read from Schaeffer?
I've read Trilogy, that set of 3 books,
right?
And then Art in the Bible,
The God Who Is There,
The God Who Is There. He's there and he's spoken.
He's not. Or God, yeah, he's there. He's not
And
silent.
Escape from Reason.
And Escape from Reason.
Yeah.
Have you read How Then Should We Yet Live?
No, there's a bunch of his books that I haven't read yet that I want to because I liked Trilogy so much, but I just haven't got to reading them yet.
Yeah, you if you like the others, you'll definitely love that. And the Christian Manifesto is phenomenal. I mean, you listen to it, read it, whatever however you read today. I mean, I tell people I'm reading, and really someone's reading to me while I'm mowing my yard, but it's same. When you, especially Christian Manifesto, you're like, wow, this guy, when he wrote this, he was so far ahead of his times. He was a genius, absolutely a genius. So you consider presuppositionalism your favorite form of apologetics. You get to use it much?
Sometimes. I like it because I think starting from scripture is important. Like, I don't want to have to prove scripture from something else. Yeah.
No, you're I know I put you on the spot. No, I actually love presuppositionalism, and I struggle with classical and evidential apologetics. Not that there isn't a place, but I tell people all the time that really what I end up using evidential or classical apologetics for more often than not is with other professing Christians.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I've had the run into the problem. I think what I was originally reading was probably more in the evidential and other kinds of apologetics, and I think that just maybe it's just me. It made me feel like more like it's a debate than I like what Schaeffer focuses on, that you're not trying to argue with someone, you're trying to show them the gospel and show them Christ, and you're using logic and reason to get there. So it's not a game. I think he says that, which is, I feel like, not all, but some of the other branches of apologetics sometimes make it feel like a game, like you're just stacking up evidence. But I want to start with scripture.
Well, you get a lot of the Pascal's wager type arguments from evidentialism and classical, in my view, classical apologetics of, well, if I'm right and you're wrong, you have everything to lose. But if I'm wrong and you're right, I don't have anything to lose. And it just really kind of opens it up then. So then why are we even having this conversation? Whereas what I see with presuppositionalism is like you said, you're engaging from an intellectual and reasoning perspective, and you're saying, like, we all start from some presupposition. The atheist, the Buddhist, the Christian, everybody starts from a presupposition. And if you're not willing to admit that, if you're not willing to admit that you have a bedrock that you're standing on, now for most people, that bedrock that they're standing on is actually just crumbling sand, a crumbling foundation. But to get them to be able to admit that and say, okay, let's start from that point, put you on equal footing, in the sense of, one doesn't necessarily need to feel the need to tower over the other person. What you're actually really doing is you're kind of whittling away at their base and taking them down to the basis for understanding that their views are completely subjective as opposed to an objective standard.
I do see that. I think I have been, like, when I ask people questions, I try to come from that perspective, especially with going back, I guess, to the social justice issues. Like, I feel there's a desire there for some people to actually pursue justice. Like they just don't understand what they're
Right.
doing is not justice. So I try to ask them, especially if they're not a believer, like, why do you want justice? Where does justice come from? Those
How
kind
do
of
you
questions.
define it?
How do you define it, right? Because if you don't have God who defines the rules for justice, then it's all subjective. It's all
Right.
just humans.
It's what you get to decide
Yeah,
justice is today. So that today it might be you don't get to keep your job if you're, in one of the privileged classes. Tomorrow it might be justice is you have to die.
yeah,
That's really what it comes down to. And a lot of times they cannot define justice. That's why they have to put the adjectives on there, the descriptors on there. Oh, well, this is racial justice, this is sexual justice, this is gender justice, which is why we have all these different theories. Is everybody's striving because there's so much tension and so much strife in the world. One of my favorite conversations to have is with people who are atheists and have been told their entire lives, or their entire trek through atheism, you're immoral because you're an atheist. Well, we all know that's not true. Atheists do not make up a larger percentage of people who are out committing crimes, murdering and stealing or anything, because they have a morality. They just can't, for lack of better terminology, a lot of times their morality is coming from societal norms, which is great. It's got to come from somewhere, but they don't have an argument for it. Do you see that? Do you think that plays a big part in the conversations that you have with people around in your generation, that they're striving for a morality, but they don't know how to define it and why?
yeah, yeah. I think that's where I try to start with people, because I think that's just an innate God-given thing in humans, that we want to justify ourselves. We want to strive. We know there's some kind of morality, and we have a conscience. But if it's not trained by scripture, it's going to be trained by the culture. So that's what I see a lot with just everyone, but especially people my age, that it's totally guided by the culture. So if you like, I try to point that out and ask deeper questions about, like, why did you come to this conclusion? Are you just making this assumption because you were told this, because it's easier, because it's popular, or because it's true?
And when you ask those kind of questions, what are the responses? I mean, do you feel like you're getting an honest response from people? Are they just going, well, it's true?
Yeah, it's a lot of that. I feel like it's a lot of just repeating points that it sounds like they've heard from somewhere. Yeah.
Well, which is ironic considering that's what they accuse Christians of quite often.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just parroting what you've been taught. And yeah, and to be honest with you, for a lot of Christians, yeah, that's true. They're literally just parroting what they've been taught. And when you push them, they can't give you an explanation for why they believe what they believe, which of course is where we get the phrase apologetics, is to always be ready to give an answer for the hope, or a defense for the hope that lies within you. You need to be able to give it. Your faith needs to be your own. So on that note,